You are listening to the Air Raid Hour with host Judge Mathis, dog, Tilt Money, dog, presented by the fine folks over at the Cover One Sports Network, dogs. Bills Mafia, let's go!
Welcome in, ladies and gentlemen, to the Air Raid Hour. My name is Steve Mathis. You can find me on Twitter at Judge Mathis, joined as always by my co-host Dave Tilton. Together we are the Bills guys, and this show is presented by Picasso's Pizza and the Cover One Sports Network. The big topic for today, Dave, is going to be the Senior Bowl, and we're going to sort of react and go position by position and talk about, you know, guys that fit the Bills and guys that we liked or guys that we were disappointed in this week. But before we get into that, I think we got to talk about Tom Brady in his underwear. Did you happen to see that on social media this morning? I know there was an earthquake. But did you happen to see this Tom Brady underwear reveal this AM?
I mean, how could you not have seen it? It was everywhere on social media. Would have
It might have
liked
been what
to not
caused the
see it.
earthquake, to be honest.
It could have been. He could have stood up and dropped it down there. Anyway, look, hey, it's a Monday, you know, Senior Bowl is this past weekend. Slow news day other than the earthquake, so I guess you had to put something out there.
The rumor is that he was not too happy that Aaron Rodgers was stealing all the spotlight this weekend at the Pro-Am, talking about the Raiders and Devontae Adams. So Tom Brady had to get his name in the news again, and what better way than posing for a picture in your underwear? It looked fake too. It didn't even look real. It looked very CGI. But then again, Tom Brady over the last year has started to turn into like a Terminator looking robot, very uncomfortable looking man.
Not to get too sidetracked here, but I'm sure a lot of people here have seen those like year by year like transition photos of Tom Brady from like when his first year to now, and somehow his face is like decreased in size by like 2 inches on each side. It used to be like a pretty square shaped face, and now it's like very skinny. I don't know how physically that happens. Like you get skinnier in your jawline, but somehow he's done it. I don't know. Money can buy a lot of things.
Gabe comes in and says, "What's up, guys? Excited to see you guys again. And we're excited to be back doing what we love here. And this is oddly enough our favorite time of year. Like as much as we love the Bills season and all of the heartache and everything that comes with it and all the excitement that comes with it, I think me and you both like had this conversation a few weeks ago. There's a little bit less pressure in the off season, a little less anxiety in the off season because you can just take a second to breathe and relax. And there's a lot more projecting than there is sort of doing the ins and outs of the stuff we do in the regular season. So Jason Sugg comes in and says, let's go, boys, share your wisdom. So let's hop right into it. And again, we want to break down what went down in Mobile. How lucky were we to have the Cover One crew down there, sharing all of their interviews and doing the pop-up shows that they did. They did an excellent job this week. So shout out to everyone from Cover One that was down there this week sharing their wisdom. This is the time of year I start listening to Pro Football Focus again a little bit because believe it or not, like they put out they churn out a ton of different draft content that's pretty solid. Brett Coleman, this is the Brett Coleman time of year as well. If you guys don't listen to his podcast, obviously Joe Marino, Kyle Krabs do a great job with the draft dude. So there's a ton of different draft content that's starting to drop now. It's that time of year, and it's a great time of year where I just get lost in all of the prospects here. So let's start with, I think, the position that everyone wants to talk about, and that's interior offensive line. This is the position that, you know, most of us fans have been self-scouting for a while now. Most of us fans want to see the Buffalo Bills go in this direction in the draft early, whether it's with our first pick or with our second round pick. And it seems like, based on what some of the Cover One boys were telling us, Brandon Beane had his eyes on the offensive line quite a bit when they were down in Mobile. So that maybe is an indicator of where the Buffalo Bills minds are at. I'm just going to list off some of the Senior Bowl offensive linemen that stuck out to me. This is not an exhaustive list of every single offensive lineman that was interior offensive lineman that was at the Senior Bowl, but just guys whose names I heard, whether maybe they were positive or whether they were negative. And then I'm going to get your take on some of these guys. And we already have the first name that I'm going to mispronounce of the season, and that's the center from Michigan, Olusegun Oluwatimi.
I just call him Olu. That's all. I
Olu.
mean,
There we
yeah,
go.
I just call him Olu.
The center from Michigan, you have Cody Mock, the interior offensive lineman from North Dakota State. He was a tackle at North Dakota State. Most NFL guys think he's going to be a guard in the pros, and some guys in Mobile want to see him at center a little bit as well. So Cody Mock is a guy to keep an eye on. Jarrett Patterson from Notre Dame, Osiris Torrance, our guy from Florida, everyone's guy really.
Yep.
The ball of the ball in Mobile was John Michael Schmitz from Minnesota, the center. You obviously have Steve Avila from TCU, a big body guard as well. Emil Ikior from Alabama. That's one of Eric Turner's favorites this year. And then Nick Broker from Ole Miss is another guy that I really like. And I know our guy Merck is a big fan of Nick Broker as well. So let's just get it started. Who stood out to you the most at offensive guard as you sort of read through the articles and watched the tape and scrolled social media this week? What interior offensive lineman stood out to you the most?
Yeah, I mean, this is tough, right, this year, because last year you go into sort of draft season and free agency for the Bills, and the glaring need for the Bills, at least the perception of the glaring need, was guard, right? And they went and ahead and signed Roger Saffold, got Rick Bates back. This year it's a little bit different, right? Because there's question marks, not necessarily about maybe 2023, but the future beyond 2023 for Mitch Morse at center. There's now big question marks about Spencer Brown at right tackle. And there are still question marks. And I figured this was going to be the case because I said, look, we're still going to have question marks beyond 2022 with this interior offensive line. So for me, when it comes to the interior offensive line, I mean, Torrance is the guy to me that if you're talking about like non-centers, right? Like, and we'll kind of talk about that separately. Torrance is the guy to me that sticks out like a sore thumb, that if you're picking and if you're the Bills at 27 and you don't address interior offensive line during free agency, and that's a guy that's sitting in your, staring you in the face at 27, and you've talked and talked and talked about protecting Josh Allen and protecting your investment, how is that not a guy that you look to as a potential answer? And by all accounts, the practice reports and all the reports coming from our guys at C1 down there, like all positive reviews from Torrance. But Akior is the guy for me that kind of stood out. And the reason I say that is because, you mentioned Eric. You mentioned Eric had some good things to say about him, but he's a guy that's taken an interesting path, right? He's played a lot of games in his career. He had a good year in 2020, perhaps maybe regressed a little bit in 2021, but came back nicely in 2022. PFF has him rated as a top 40 guard. In 2022, he's played in over 40 career games. He's been a stalwart on that line. The scouting reports on him is that he has a quick first step in the running game, which obviously is something that we're very interested in now as we kind of try to reestablish this, this running game for the Bills and reestablish that interior. And to me, most of the things that you look at for him that are downsides, things like balance and technique, are things that to me, with the right coaching, are things that you can iron out, right? So for me, the things that are flaws for a guy like Okoye are things that are coachable. And so for me, that's a guy that stood out to me. And if you are the Bills and you don't want to invest a first round pick on an interior offensive lineman, he could be a guy in day two that maybe you look at as potentially taking. So for me, Torrance and Emil were the two guys. You mentioned Avila. He's a guy I kind of did some research into. The one thing that I worry about him is like, is he really going to be a fit for them schematically? Like, he seems like he'd be maybe more of a fit in a power gap scheme. Not to say that the Bills wouldn't go towards that now if they want to try to maybe make some changes, but you can't deny it. He's a two-time All-American. He's been one of the best linemen on one of the best running teams in the country for the past 2 years. Obviously, TCU was in the national championship game. A lot of that was because of him, but so I put him kind of on the short list there. But for me, it's Torrance and Akior at the top of the list for me.
And that's the thing, right? It's like, what kind of offensive linemen are the Buffalo Bills going to look for? Like, there are a ton of dudes who we didn't even mention, like Tyler Steen from Alabama. We're going to mention Matthew Bergeron in a second from Syracuse. These are tackles who sort of fit the archetype of what Aaron Cromer wants to kick into guard. These like 6'6" guys, these 6'5" guys, these 315-ish pounds. That's sort of the archetype. So even an Osiris Torrance goes against type. It was really nice to see because he's been listed at 6'5", 350. He was 330 something at the Senior Bowl. So it was nice to see him shed some weight and still look as good as he did. My guy Steve Avila, I like him because he's like a dancing bear at 6 foot 330.
He's very good.
Left guard, right guard, he was playing at. He was taking some snaps at center, and he's even played a little bit of right tackle. So he shows sort of his versatility, and he shows that he sort of has a quick lower half. So Steve Avila is really the big one that stood out to me. But I think the big three in Mobile, the three biggest winners, I think Osiris Torrance might not even be on the board when the Buffalo Bills pick in the first round.
That's the thing. He's probably not going to be.
I think John Michael Schmitz might not be on the board when the Buffalo Bills pick in the first round.
My note on him, for, at least for now, was could Schmitz be the redemption story for not taking Creed Humphrey?
And I'll tell you what, when it comes to John Michael Schmitz, I think he could be our Eric Wood 2.0. Like, and we've heard some of the guys in the Cover One group chat talk about this. I know a lot of people are like, well, first round might be too early for John Michael Schmitz. I haven't seen a single scouting report or a single member of the draft community that has had like a negative word to say about John Michael Schmitz. I would rather them take John Michael Schmitz at 27, who's more of a traditional center when we already have Mitch Morse, than Cody Mock, who to me is a second round pick. And we'll get into Cody Mock in a second. But John Michael Schmitz at 27, I think would be a great pickup. You can start him at guard like Eric Wood did, and then he can transition to center. Like that is a guy who can start from day one and could possibly be the pillar of the middle of that offensive line for a decade. I think John Michael Schmitz is a no-brainer at 27. Do you feel comfortable taking him at 27?
I absolutely do. He was the number 1 rated center in all of college football per PFF last year. I mean, the rankings for him are a little bit around, like all over the place. Like there are some that have him kind of in that late first, some have him as a late second. But at the end of the day, if you're the Bills and you really want to make sure that you could get a guy that can be your heir apparent to Mitch Morse and a guy that you can plug in from day one at guard, that's your guy. And again, I'll be pounding the table for a guy like Schmitz. I'll be pounding the table for a guy like Torrance, much like I was pounding the table for, a guy like Kenyon Green or Zion Johnson last year. Schmitz is the guy for me this year with Torrance. Like if one of them are there at 27 and the Bills take them, you're not going to get any complaints from me. I know it's offensive line. I know it's not sexy, but I will say a lot of the Bills Mafia community, even more so than last year, where there were a lot of people in support of taking interior offensive line. There's a lot of vocal support from Bills Mafia and taking a line in that first round.
And now the most popular name that I'm seeing going to the Buffalo Bills at 27 in a lot of mock drafts, and that's Cody Mock from North Dakota State. And I like Cody Mock. I think he's a great, I would trade up in the second round for him. I would take him if he was on the board in the second round. I just don't know if I'm on board with him at 27, like some people are now mocking us. He is who everyone wanted to see in Mobile, and he lived up to the hype. But I think we need to understand that this is a guy that, and most of Bills Mafia wants, I want a road grader. I want a guy who can improve the run game. I want this big, strong, powerful guy. That's not Cody Mock. Cody Mock was a left tackle at North Dakota State. He came to that school as a tight end. He weighed 230 pounds. He's never going to get above 300 pounds. And despite the fact that he wins in a lot of ways, and despite the fact that he's improving, and despite that the fact that he can still add to his frame and he can develop in the pros, he does have a weaker lower half. And he's not going to be some dominant guy who's going to push guys around. That's not how he wins. So I think a lot of people, when they really start to dig into Cody Mock, are going to get a little less intrigued. I know the flowing ginger hair and the lack of the front teeth and his great personality and his great work ethic and the school that he comes from. All of those things are great. And I wouldn't mind the Buffalo Bills utilizing a second round pick on him. I just don't know if I'm sold on Cody Mock in the first round.
I'm not sold on him in the first round, but again, it could be a good consolation prize, right? If you do decide to pass. And we talked about a lot of these guys last year too, like Parham, Bernard Raymond, like guys like this that we were like, okay, well, if the Bills kind of pass on like a Zion or a Kenyon Green in the first round, there are guys to be had in day 2, to me, that would be Cody Mock right now. Now, I'm not saying that at the end of the day, how upset would I be if they did decide to go for him there? Like, at the end of the day, if they're investing in what I believe, again, we don't know how blue chip this guy is, right? I mean, he's got the great movement, he's got the great lateral agility, he's got the temperament and toughness, but how much of a blue chipper is he? I don't know. And that's the thing. Like, if I'm gonna spend a first round pick on a guy, I want him to be a blue chipper. And like, I just don't know right now. And I'm not saying he can't be, but I don't know if he is that to where you feel that confident to take him in the first round yet.
Yeah, and the Buffalo Bills have options, even if they decide not to go with a guy in the first round. You mentioned one of your guys, Ekiyor from Alabama. I think he's a guy who could be available early day 3 or late day 2. That's a guy who might even be able to plug and play right away because of how much he played at Alabama. Nick Broker from Ole Miss. I think Jared Patterson will be there on day 3 from Notre Dame.
I agree.
I have no idea why they switched him to left guard this year. I think he's a better center than a guard. And for as many highlights as Jared Patterson had this week, he also got pushed around quite a ton too. So there was a lot of lowlights for a guy like Jared Patterson.
I'll go on record to say I'm probably not as high on Patterson as a lot
I
of
think
the
he's
Bills
a backup.
Mafia.
I don't think he's some guy that you draft to be a starter here, but I think he would be a really solid, versatile 3-position interior offensive lineman backup. And then Olu from Michigan too. Again, I'm not the highest. I'm not the highest on him. I don't think he's a day 1 starter or anything like that, but he's a guy who could sit behind Mitch Morse, and then maybe you have something 2 years down the road when Mitch Morse's contract is up. And there are other guys that weren't at the Senior Bowl, and I'm not talking about underclassmen either. And I want to make sure that we take time on this show to talk about the Shrine Bowl and what Eric Galko is doing out there in Vegas. This is becoming a premier bowl game that they're putting out there in Vegas, and they're getting some premier talent. And I think at some positions, they do better than Jim Nagy and the Senior Bowl. And one of those positions was quarterback this year. And we're going to get to that. The quarterbacks were awful in Mobile. It was terrible. The better quarterbacks were in Vegas at the Shrine Bowl. But the guard position, there were a couple of guys. Now, there are some guys who, like, later end of the draft that the Buffalo Bills managed to accumulate a 6th or a 7th round draft pick. Ricky Stromberg from Arkansas is a long-term developmental center that I like. Jordan McFadden from Clemson. He's an undersized tackle who could kick inside. He's a really scrappy player who's played in some big games in his time at Clemson. Jackson Kirkland is another guy who was a really high recruit. A lot of people were talking as a first-round draft pick as early as last year, but he sort of flamed out. He's kicked inside to guard. He had a solid week at the Shrine Bowl, but the two guys that one of my favorite, members of the draft scouting community, Brett Coleman, is super high on, and he talked about it on his Shrine Bowl podcast this week. One of your guys from NC State, Chandler Zavala, he is a big dude at guard, and another guy from UCLA, Antonio Mafi, is another dude. There are some guards like Zavada and Mafi from the Shrine Bowl who could be had in the 4th, 5th round, who Brett Coleman believes could be day 1 starters. And if not, they could be like, say, Ryan Bates's backups or competition for Ryan Bates. So there are some guys who weren't in Mobile that aren't underclassmen, that are some Shrine Bowl guys that could legitimately be mid-round draft picks that could be a steal for the Buffalo Bills in the middle of this draft.
Yeah, Zavala, obviously, people know the plight of me being an NC State fan. Like, the NC State offense this year was really obviously not great in the passing game. Quarterback carousel there between injuries and stuff like that. But the running game has consistently been pretty good for that Wolfpack offense. We see guys like Bam Knight come out at the running back position. We've seen offensive linemen in the past come out of this program between Garrett Bradbury at center. We've seen guys like Joe Tooney have a long career as an interior offensive lineman coming from NC State. So, like, the NC State, to their credit, they have put a lot of guys in the NFL from both sides of their lines. And Zavala is a guy that obviously I'm familiar with and wouldn't be upset investing, a day 3 pick on. And I think this ultimately comes down to the question of, like, is a day 3 pick going to be something that moves the needle in improving this Bills offensive line? And I don't know that we're going to know the answer to that until we go through free agency.
Yeah.
And so I think it's going to be hard for people to maybe, like, necessarily wrap their minds around a day 3 pick as being like the savior or as being a key contributor. But if the Bills do something creative and kind of work something in free agency with a veteran and then get a guy like a Zavala, that's an interesting proposition to me. So yeah,
Yeah.
I'm with you on that.
And that's super interesting too, because, that's sort of like next week, we're going to start with our free agent talk, and we're going to talk about free agents on offense that sort of intrigue us. And one of the guys that intrigues me in free agency is Will Hernandez, and Will Hernandez isn't a slam dunk. Like, you're sort of taking a risk in free agency. Again, you're shooting for upside. He's a guy who sort of was a high draft pick, flamed out in New York, had a good rebound year in Arizona, got hurt. You're taking a risk with a guy like Will Anderson, but you can support that risk by drafting a guy in the 3rd or 4th round to back up Will Anderson, compete with Will Anderson. And if Will Anderson flames out or gets hurt like he did this year, you have the backup there. So yeah, free agency changes a lot of things, especially in terms of draft needs. Gabe comes in and says the Chiefs got Trey Smith in the 6th round last year. I agree. Like, that was a really good pick for them.
And
he was a guy who should have gone sooner. Yeah. Like, back injury, right? I'll give you another example. Jamari Sawyer last year.
Yep.
From Georgia, went in the 6th freaking round. I was screaming at my television for 3 rounds. Brandon, take Jamari Sawyer. And that's one of those things, like we talked about last week. It's frustrating. Like, sometimes these NFL
comment right here from Roy.
Sometimes NFL front offices, it's like, how do you not see what all of these people in the draft community on the internet see? Like, how do you not see Jamari Sawyer is good? How do you not see Trey Smith is good? Like, how do you not see that? Like, how do you not think a 4th round pick is worth the risk of a guy who might have a bad back? Like, sometimes I just don't understand what goes through some of these front offices heads, but you had a comment that you put up that you wanted to get to. Sorry about that.
Oh no, I mean, it was just Roy. I think kind of summarizing how we all feel. It's sickening. Another season ends and we're talking about the O-line. And I warned, like, not just me, like, I'm not taking credit or anything, but like, I warned, like, not investing beyond 2022. Yeah. We're going to be having these same conversations again in 2023. And here we are, right?
We led the last off season with it because Brandon Beane led last off season with it. Our number one goal is to protect Josh Allen, as well. How he opened his 2021 offseason press conference. And what did he do? He added Roger Saffold. He re-signed Ryan Bates, and he signed David Quessenberry, and he drafted Luke Tenuta in the 6th round. Like, and then picked up Greg Van Roten off the street. Like, he didn't do anything. He did nothing. So it's good to see that in Mobile this week, he was essentially, according to a lot of people, just laser focused in on the offensive line. I was not expecting to take over 10 minutes here on the interior offensive line, but I shouldn't be surprised because this is sort of the biggest key here. So I'm gonna give you one more question here before we transition to tackle.
Okay.
Cody Mock, Osiris Torrance, John Michael Schmitz. The Buffalo Bills can have one of them in the draft this year. The Buffalo Bills are guaranteed to draft one of those 3 guys, Mock, Torrance, or Schmitz. Who is your guy of the 3?
Torrance. Taking Torrance. I'm taking the stud, absolute blue chipper guard, interior guy that can be a plug and play guard for 10 plus years. I know Schmitz is probably going to be the pick for most people because of the future of Mitch Morse beyond, this year. And he's an absolute stud center, number 1 rated center for PFF last year. And so it's close. Mock's a distant 3rd for me, though. It's Torrance and Schmitz, and then Mock a distant 3rd.
Yeah. We got the Bills Mafia Fuchs coming in saying Torrance, and Chris Kepner, he wants a free agent. He says Ben Powers, please. So it's tough. Like, I winced when you were talking because I want to go Schmitz. But I'm going to stick with a guy who's been my guy from day one in Osiris Torrance as well. All right, let's stick to the offensive line and let's talk a little bit about offensive tackle, because there are questions about whether Spencer Brown should be the starting right tackle for the Buffalo Bills in 2023. Now, the question you have to ask yourself, are the Buffalo Bills going to go out in free agency and find a veteran to compete and give Spencer Brown another shot? And if Spencer Brown fails, you have the sort of fail safe there. Or do the Buffalo Bills look to the draft? Because there are some stud right tackle only prospects. DeJuan Jones and Darnell Wright are 2 of my favorite prospects in this draft class.
Wright's my favorite so far. Yeah.
I think that they are plug and play day 1 starting right tackles and could probably start at like right tackle for a decade. Like, I'm not saying they're Ryan Ramczyk from for the New Orleans Saints. I don't think that's not my comp for them, but it's just like, you're going to draft them on the late 1st round. I think Ramczyk went later for the Saints, and they're just going to be there forever. And they're just going to be your right tackle forever. And they're going to be good. So DeJuan Jones and Darnell Wright are the first two that really stood out to me in the Senior Bowl at tackle. You obviously have the tackle guard guy in Matthew Bergeron from Syracuse. I know our guy David Fox was all over that. He was all over Wanya Morris from Oklahoma, another tackle guard, flexible guy. And then again, there was a ton of names at tackle in the Senior Bowl, but none of them really stuck out to me. The only one I really added to my list here was Jalen Duncan, just because the upside, but I almost feel like that's another Spencer Brownish type of move, like an upside raw tackle prospect. So I even wince a little bit at the thought of a Jalen Duncan, but who stood out to you the most in Mobile?
Well, I think the first question we have to ask is like, what are our priorities, right? As far as this offensive line, is it addressing the interior first? Are we that concerned about right tackle that we would consider replacing Spencer Brown? And in the Cover One group chat, I think like Greg and others put it best. It's like, we shouldn't say we're like pigeonholing ourselves out of taking a certain position just because we hope and think that there's a good athlete on the team that has like a bright future. Like, we think Spencer Brown could be good, but he hasn't been that great, and he was a third-round pick. Like, don't double down on your mistake by not taking somebody that's a stud because of what you think Spencer Brown might become, and he hasn't in 2 years from a small school. So for me, it's Jones and Wright. To me, those are the two guys that are at the top of my list as far as like realistic options. Obviously, you're probably not going to get guys like Johnson, coming down the board at that point. So ultimately, like, this is where I've struggled because Jones and Wright, to me, well, maybe Wright and you could get in day 2. I think probably you could, actually, now that I think about it. But Jones, you might not be able to, right? Like,
I
Jones
think
is
both
like,
of those guys, you got 27 or bust. I think both of them. I think Wright is playing his way into round 1 as well.
So again, free agency will dictate a lot of what happens here. Are the Bills able to get some kind of veteran depth, like a Will Hernandez maybe at guard in free agency, that would then maybe put the priority to a guy like Jones or Wright at 27 if the Bills felt so inclined to do that? So I do think free agency, even though it's been kind of said by Brandon Beane that we're not going to be super splashy in free agency, like, just from a numbers game, look, Saffold's a UFA, Quessenberry, UFA, Van Roten, UFA. Like, you're going to have to patch some of these holes in free agency on this offensive line. You just, from a numbers game, you have to. So I think that will dictate probably a lot of where we might think of priorities when it comes to the draft. But yeah, those guys, Wright and Johnson, Wright and Jones, excuse me, for me. Johnson's not probably going to be there. So those would be the two for me. But yeah, it's hard to say right now because I've just like fallen in love with so many of these guys that, like, of course I'm going to get my hopes dashed again.
Yeah, we got a question coming in saying, what do you think of Carter Warren out of Pitt? He's an intriguing prospect. I don't know if I would buy into him any later than the 4th round. Age is a concern at 25. Injury history is a concern. He's got, and he's got some lower body issues, and he's not the strongest in the lower body, but he's got length and he's got size, and he's a noted pass blocker from his time at Pitt. So a guy like Carter Warren is super interesting to me. And I know we just talked about like Trey Smith, and we talked about Jamari Salyer, and like not overthinking things and not underdrafting players. I still think like you wouldn't be underdrafting Carter Warren if you took him in the 4th round. Like, I'm not, like, Trey Smith fell to the 6th. I wouldn't let a guy like Carter Warren fall to the 6th, but I do think like the 4th round would be a range for a guy like him. The guy that intrigues, first of all, I want to go back to Darnell Wright and DeJuan Jones for a second. If we have a chance to pull the trigger on one of those two at pick 27, I will not blame Brandon Beane for 1 second if he pulls the trigger on either of those guys at 27. Like, Darnell Wright is probably my favorite prospect in this entire draft class, like, period, of any position. I think that dude is an absolute stud. DeJuan Jones is a physical freak, and we've seen his ability to pass block and keep a guy like CJ Stroud clean for all of those years at Ohio State. I think those two things are like almost like sure bets at pick 27. And if you take them, like, that opens up some possibilities for Spencer Brown. You can use him as that TE3, that Bobby Hart role last year, and you can still put him on the field a ton, and you can utilize him as a run blocker. He's also an athletic dude. So now you have an athletic guy to play with as a backup. Left tackle, right tackle, swing. You can work him on both sides and you can get him comfortable on both sides. So you have a really solid backup there because guess what? Injuries happen in the National Football League. We saw that to the Cincinnati Bengals, who had to start Jackson Carman at left tackle in the playoffs. That could easily happen to the Buffalo Bills. So if you have a guy like Spencer Brown who sits on the bench all year but is in practice and through training camp working left tackle, right tackle, left tackle, right tackle, maybe he can show up in a pinch if somebody gets hurt and he can actually play well, despite the fact that he has struggled so far throughout his career.
And I mean, just from a positional value standpoint, like regardless of the Bills' need, right? Right tackle is a stud right tackle, just from a volume and from a positional value standpoint, is going to be harder to find than a guy that can be serviceable on the interior. So I get from a positional value standpoint, taking like the team needs out of the equation, right tackle is more valuable. A great right tackle is more valuable and is harder to find than someone that you could put on the interior, at right guard or wherever that may be. So I'm with you on that approach, right? Like obviously free agency will dictate it as well, but like right is a stud. So I mean, I'm with you on that. It's time for the Bills to really invest the right way in this offensive line, and it can't be patchwork. I mean, Hansel put that great graphic up the other day with like the depth chart of just Brandon Beane draft picks, right, for rookies and how the team would look, and it was obvious the biggest weakness from drafting has been the offensive line, and the one stud that was there, Wyatt Teller, is obviously no longer with the team.
And here's
so
the joke from Steve Rose here: just don't trade Spencer Brown to the Cleveland Browns.
oh my God, he'll turn into an all-pro, right?
The last two guys I really want to touch on is I think Matthew Bergeron and Wanya Morris are two guys that I would not be surprised if they're on the Buffalo Bills radar. Both of these, I think Matthew Bergeron is a second rounder. I think Wanya Morris is more of a third rounder. He could maybe test his way at the combine into the second round because he is an athletic dude out of Oklahoma, left tackle, right tackle, flex. But I think both of these guys sort of fit the archetype of someone that Aaron Cromer could be interested in moving inside to guard. So if they do draft a Matthew Bergeron, if they do draft a Wanya Morris, I don't think they'll be drafting them to play tackle. I think they'll be drafting them to play guard. Really, the only two tackles, and I haven't had a chance to look too deeply into the underclassmen. I know Anton Harris, the other tackle from Oklahoma, is a possibility. I haven't had a chance to look too much into him yet. Really, outside of DeJuan Jones and Darnell Wright, I don't see much in terms of plug and play right tackle in this draft class. So if you're looking to replace Spencer Brown right now, it's Jones and Wright, and Bergeron and Morris are more of these versatile chess pieces that you probably consider kicking into the interior.
Yep. Yeah, I agree.
And then Shrine Bowl again. I want to give a shout out to some Shrine Bowl guys. This is a like a 5th, 6th round pick, like a Tommy Doyle type, but I'm really big fan of Connor Galvin from Baylor. I think he's a name to keep an eye on. He's a athletic, bigger guy. So keep an eye out and keep an ear out for Connor Galvin out of Baylor. He's an interesting one, but I just don't know how much the Buffalo Bills need another Spencer Brown, Tommy Doyle type. So keep an ear out. He's an exciting player to me. I just don't know how much interest a team like the Buffalo Bills would have. All right, wide receiver. This is where it gets interesting because, man, some of these receivers had themselves a week. They made themselves some money. Rashee Rice from SMU, Tank Dell from Houston, who probably had the best week of any player in Mobile, period, regardless of position. Xavier Hutchinson, mine and Randy's guy from Iowa State. Jaden Reed.
Love Xavier Hutchinson.
Jaden Reed.
I had a note.
Yeah, is a guy who didn't get to pass the ball much with terrible quarterback play at Michigan State. He popped. A guy who's been injured for most of his career and was in that Stanford system, Michael Wilson. He popped. Dontavian Wicks had a good week. Andre Iosivas had a solid week. Trey Tucker out of Cincinnati, I heard his name a couple of times. Trey Palmer out of Nebraska, I heard his name a couple of times, and now I'm starting to see Trey Palmer out of Nebraska in second round mocks. Joe Marino had him to the Bills in the second round. I've seen him in some other second round mocks as well. Ronnie Bell from Michigan, Pukunuku Naku from BYU, Jonathan Mingo from Ole Miss, Elijah Higgins from Stanford, even Grant Dubose from Charlotte, I think had some pop plays. So again, I listed a ton of guys there because I think a ton of guys And the Senior Bowl is meant for guys like this to stand out. And a lot of the drills sort of accentuate the talents of certain positions more than others, wide receiver being one of them. So a lot of these guys popped. Who stood out to you the most from the wide receiver position?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough, right? Because if you look at you look at this game, right? And
Mm-hmm.
on one side you have 15 completions, right, from the American team, and you have 30 from the national, or maybe I haven't mixed up, but it sometimes it's hard to judge just from game action, so you have to go
Mm-hmm.
back to the practice reports. Like Rashee Rice didn't have a catch in the game, but during practice, like by all accounts, the dude was an absolute stud.
Mm-hmm.
I was excited to see what he could do in the game. Didn't have a catch, but no problem, right? Maybe that's not a bad thing for the Bills if that's a guy you're interested
Yeah.
in drafting at 27, right? Uh, look, ultimately, I think that that's a good thing for the Bills. He's a guy that's on my radar. Um, I really have started to fall in love with Xavier Hutchinson. I know you just mentioned him.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't even know that he was a guy that you and Randy were loving. But I mean, just from my preliminary kind of research into him, I mean, this dude just plucks the ball out of the air. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
you people who have complaints about Gabriel Davis, like in the way he catches and like with his body, or the way he
Mm-hmm.
like has that weird kind of technique to catch the ball. Like Xavier Hutchinson, if you want to watch a class on like how to catch the ball with your hands, just watch this guy. I mean, he
Mm-hmm.
is a 100% hands catcher. I mean, great route runner, great contested catch type of guy. Um, he's not like the speediest guy necessarily down the field, and I know that's something that Bills fans maybe are
Mm-hmm.
are clamoring for, but route running is second to none. And if you watch a lot of those games that he played for Iowa State, third downs, he's at
Mm-hmm.
1-2 yards beyond the sticks. Great field awareness, knows where he is on the field, and he's a guy that I'm really starting to like,
Mm-hmm.
Xavier Hutchinson. And then, you know, it's just one of those tough things because like so many guys get practice run at the Senior Bowl, and
Yeah.
only a few guys really stand out. So, but he's one guy that like now has kind of
Mm-hmm.
piqued my interest, that like he could be a nice fit for the Bills,
Mm-hmm.
I think.
Yeah, and the thing about Xavier Hutchinson too, like my comp for him is Corey Davis of the New York Jets. Like he's not exactly, I think, ever going to be like that alpha number one receiver, but I think he could be a solid number two receiver. And when Corey Davis is healthy, Corey Davis is a solid number
He's a
two
good
receiver,
player.
and he was
He's
a
a good
top,
player.
he was a top 5 draft pick. I think Xavier Hutchinson is another guy who could get lost in the shuffle and could be available in the 3rd or the 4th round too. I think that would be a mistake. I think Xavier Hutchinson is much better than like a Trey Palmer who's going to go sooner. But my guy through these days is Tank Dell. Like
Yeah.
everyone
Yep.
wants to make a big fuss over the size, 5'10", 165 pounds. And a lot of people want to talk about, well, if you look at it, guys who are 5'10", 165 pounds, you need to consider that like no one that size has ever really had much success in the National Football League. Look at Tutu Atwell. Look at Calvin Austin. Well, the number one thing I'll say about Tutu Atwell is if you go back and you watch Tutu Atwell at Louisville, he was catching screen passes and he was catching bombs. He wasn't really working the middle of the field. He wasn't working like all 4 layers. Nathaniel Dell is a legitimate route runner. Nathaniel Dell's separation off the line of scrimmage is redonkulous, and he can work all parts of the field. He is a complete receiver. He is a complete and nuanced route runner. So despite his lack of size, he's not a Tutu Atwell. He's not some gimmicky type of player. Other people want to point to Calvin Austin because Calvin Austin had success on the outside, despite the fact that people were projecting him to the slot. Well, Calvin Austin had Matt Canada last year to deal with as an offensive coordinator. So I don't really think the sample size is there for a guy like Calvin Austin to use as a comp. Like Nathaniel Dell is a guy who could come in right away for the Buffalo Bills as early as pick 27, despite the size, and could legitimately be that safety blanket for Josh Allen, that quick separator for Josh Allen, a guy who can work all levels of the field for Josh Allen. I think he's Josh Allen friendly. I think he's Ken Dorsey friendly. I think he is, despite his lack of size, I think he's a legitimate option for the Buffalo Bills at pick number 27.
Pick 27. That might be a little rich for my blood,
Mhm.
but I do like him. I think like if you're trying to add speed to this offense,
Mhm.
like look no further, right? I mean, he's definitely a guy that
Yeah.
can bring that element in. Look, I mean, the last few years we've seen a couple guys come out. Like you mentioned Tutu Atwell, the guy like Rondell Moore comes to mind, like other guys like that. And like some of these guys have had some success. Like Tutu Atwell did have some flashes last year with the Rams late in the season. Like Rondell Moore, prior to getting hurt last year, he was contributing at a decently steady clip for the Cardinals early in the year before DeAndre Hopkins came back. So like, it's not, I think it comes down to expectation, right? And if you're going to draft Dell in the first round, that comes with a whole load more of expectation than if he's a day 2 pick. So obviously expectations plus reality will either equal disappointment or happiness, right? So it's just like, for me, that's a little too rich for my blood, but I'm not opposed to adding playmakers to this offense. I just don't think that for me, he'd be the guy that I pull the trigger on in the first round.
Yeah, I mean the other two players that really stood out to me were Jaden Reed from Michigan State and Michael Wilson of Stanford. These are two guys whose circumstances maybe kept them a little bit more hidden, and these are guys that now that people get to see them in Mobile, and people get to see them at the combine, and people get to go back and look at the film and see things like when they aren't targeted. I think these are guys who are going to move up the draft boards. Michael Wilson, the medicals are going to be important because I think he's played like 4, 6, and 6 games in his 3 years at Stanford. It hasn't been a lot, but Michael Wilson and Jaden Reed, they're both quick separators. They're both twitchy guys. They're both twitchy route runners. So again, looking for a Ken Dorsey fit, looking for a Josh Allen fit. I think Jaden Reed and Michael Wilson are two guys who fit into what the Buffalo Bills want to do. I think they're guys who could be available for you in the second round, possibly the third round. So really, I think Jaden Reed and Michael Wilson could complement Gabriel Davis and Khalil Shakir and form a nice, solid young nucleus around a Stephon Diggs. So Reed and Wilson were the other two that really stood out to me.
Yeah, Reed stood out. Obviously, like his versatility, he can return kicks. Looks like he'd probably be a slot guy at the next level, but we'll see. Look, some of the scouting reports on him like knock his top end speed, but he looked pretty fast to me on that one catch he had during the game. So it'll be very interesting to see how he tests to me. If he runs a good time, I think you could see Reed kind of scoot up the draft boards for sure, because right now he's been kind of like consensus day 3 guy. But if he runs well, given his versatility and given that, he can contribute on teams, like he could be a guy that definitely rises up boards.
Yeah. Looking at a couple of other guys that were in Mobile, Trey Palmer is another guy who could rise quickly, transferred to Nebraska from Tennessee. Our guy Andrew in the Cover One group chat said, go back and look at his Iowa game. He absolutely torched Iowa. That's a really high quality prospect when you look at that tape. Trey Tucker, the slot from Cincinnati, Andre Iashivas. He had a rough week, but he's still rather raw. Like the Christian Watson comps were unfair, but he's got that type of ability. But he's just a lot more raw than I think even a guy like Christian Watson was. Puku Naku from BYU is an interesting one too. He left after day 1. Like he stopped, like he left after day 1, 6'2", 205. And sort of the rumors and rumblings around Mobile that I've heard from a couple of people on a couple of different podcasts is that Puku Naku heard what he wanted to hear from scouts about where he would be drafted and about how people saw him, and he just booked. He didn't want to risk injury or anything like that. So Naku is a guy who could maybe get his name called on day 2 of the draft, where we're not really expecting much because we didn't really hear much from him because he only practiced for 1 day in Mobile. But I know a lot of people in our Cover One group chat are pretty high on Naku as well. Some guys who had some bad weeks. I heard Ronnie Bell didn't have the greatest week in the world. I heard Elijah Higgins was awful. They're already starting to sort of move him to tight end and stuff like that. So Dontavian Wicks is the last one I had. He reminds me so much of Gabriel Davis, as a guy who can just sort of get down the field, catch the ball in the field, has his drop issues as well. But if we double dip at wide receiver and take one early and then take another guy in the 4th, 5th round, if Dontavian Wicks is on the board from Virginia, he's a guy who can get downfield and run those 4 verts that Ken Dorsey loves. And I would really like a guy like Dontavian Wicks out of Virginia. Anyone else sort of in this list sort of stick out to you? I know a couple of guys in the Cover One group chat really like Jonathan Mingo from Ole Miss as well.
No, I like Mingo. There's a guy from the Shrine Bowl that I would talk about, but I think we covered most of the guys from Mobile that I would talk about.
Who's that guy from the Shrine Bowl you want to talk about? Is it Zay Flowers?
No, but I love Zay Flowers. I mean, Zay Flowers outside of I mean, him and Hutchinson are kind of like
Mm-hmm.
my like guys right now. Like
Yeah.
Zay Flowers to me, playing at BC doesn't necessarily get the huge national attention, but I mean, the guy's
Yeah.
ability to contort his body, to use his hands to catch the ball, his ability, like when I watch Zay Flowers catch the ball, it's like I don't know how to describe it. It's like when you watch him
Mm-hmm.
catch the ball, you almost don't even see him catch the ball because his stride doesn't break at all. Like he
Yeah.
just continues running, and you don't even, it's so effortless to him when he catches the ball. And he's a guy that we talk about yak a lot with the Bills,
Mm-hmm.
and whether that's scheme or personnel or whatever, like that's a guy that can get you yak on his own regardless. But
Mm-hmm.
so Zay Flowers, I love,
Yeah.
and A.T. Perry's the other guy, but he's
Yeah.
a little bit older. I think Randy mentioned
Yeah.
he had some questionable, his hands, and had some question marks around like his ability to catch with his hands coming into
Mm.
the week, but he had a good week of practice.
Yeah.
And he's a guy that scored 26 touchdowns over the last 2 seasons.
I mean,
So
the way
he
the
can
guy
get in the
moves
end
it,
zone.
the way the guy moves at 6'5", 205 is incredible. So like,
Yeah.
he really popped off at the Shrine Bowl this week. Back to Zay Flowers real quick though, too. Like whether it's Zay Flowers or Tank Dell, that's sort of what I'm looking for is those quick twitch, easy separators, someone to make it easy, make life easy for Josh Allen out of the slot.
I'd
Now
take
we're
Zay
talking.
over Tank Dell right now. I would take him over
Yeah,
Tank Dell.
and I wouldn't, so I wouldn't argue with you on that, and I wouldn't be upset with that either. I think both could be in play at pick number 27, just because I feel like they fit exactly what the Buffalo Bills need to do on offense. But I think there does need to be a discussion too. As much as I love Zay Flowers, and as much as I love Tank Dell, there is one underclassman who does all of these things, and he does it at such a far more elite level, and that's Jordan Addison out of USC. So for some godforsaken reason, Jordan Addison is within the Buffalo Bills range. Do what you need to do to trade up and go add Jordan Addison. Like literally, like Jordan Addison reminds me of Stephon Diggs, maybe a more slender frame, but he really does a lot of the things that Stephon Diggs does. So you're really setting yourself up for success, because even if what Jordan Addison does, because he's got a smaller frame, maybe he can't bulk up from the 170, 175 that he's at. He still does a lot of what Stephon Diggs does. And even if, like I said, even if he can't translate to the boundary, even if he can't transition to the boundary, and he can never be, Stephon Diggs' heir apparent, he'd still be an absolute dynamo from the slot. And you'd have Diggs and Davis on the outside. And you'd have Jordan Addison work in the middle, Khalil Shakir working in. And I mean, that would just be redonkulous. So as much as we enjoy these Shrine Bowl guys and these Senior Bowl guys, we also need to have an understanding that Jordan Addison could possibly be sitting there in the back half. Again, some mocks. My guess is by the time all is said and done, he's a top 15 pick, but who knows?
I think, yeah. I mean, we're gonna
Mm-hmm.
get to this. Obviously, we have plenty of shows before the draft, but if
Yeah.
he's a guy that you see him and he's fallen into the 20s, let's say early 20s,
Mm-hmm.
you may want to go up and try to make a move to get him.
Yeah. Don't sleep on Jalen Moreno Cropper out of Fresno State. I've had my eye on him for 2 years now because I'm a big Jake Hayner fan out of Fresno State. Jalen Moreno Cropper is a pretty solid receiver too. So if he's a guy who's sitting there in the 4th or the 5th round, the Buffalo Bills are looking to double dip. Another Shrine Bowl guy in Jalen Moreno Cropper is a player I really enjoy.
I'm putting a note to research into him right now.
He's good. And his slot receiver there at Fresno State too, Nico Remigio, is a pretty good one as well. I get way too into the Shrine Bowl, more than I probably should. Let's transition here from offense to defense, because we're going to go and we're going to hit every position today, but I want to hit the positions where the Buffalo Bills have the biggest need. And so far we've talked about offensive line, we talked about wide receiver. So let's get into the safety conversation, and let's talk about safety next. Some of the names at the Senior Bowl of note: JL Skinner from Boise State, Sidney Brown from Illinois, Kayvon Merriweather from Iowa, Ronnie Hickman from Ohio State, DeMarco Helms from Alabama, Jamie Robinson from Florida State, and Christopher Smith from Georgia. I have 3 guys that are like my guys, but who sort of stood out to you the most? Because I know yours is differs from mine.
So the first draft crush I fell in love with, was Sidney Jones. So I mean, he's kind of been my guy since day one. But I will say this. Sidney Brown, excuse me. JL Skinner is like maybe going to be on my draft no matter what list. And I know like maybe he's not like the archetype or the prototype that the Bills would typically look for. But if you're talking about athletic freak, which we know Brandon Bean loves, we saw a guy with that kind of athletic stature, I'd say, at corner last year, and Tariq Woolen kind of have a great season for the Seahawks. And I'm not saying they're the same because they're different positions. And you know, Skinner has mentioned that his favorite safety that he's watched, you know, growing up was Cam Chancellor. There is not a guy that, at least that I've seen so far in researching defensive players in this class, that lays the lumber like JL Skinner. Go watch some of JL Skinner's games, go watch some of his highlights, and you will see a guy that loves tackling and loves to lay the wood to people. And if you're talking about a Bills defense, and a lot of people have, that could use an injection of energy, an injection of aggressiveness, an injection of emotion, something to set the tone, a tone setting type player, JL Skinner to me is that guy. And you find a way, and look, I don't know what role he would have right away. He'd probably be the Micah Hyde heir apparent. We'll see. But he would be a guy that I'd try to find a way to get on this team one way or another.
And he's so interesting too, right? Because it's just an absolute, like, he's a height, weight, athleticism freak at 6'4", almost 220 pounds. Kind of has that J-Ron curse. And J-Ron Curse is a guy who, when he was first drafted, well, they didn't know what to do with him in Minnesota, right? And J-Ron Curse kind of struggled, but now he's with Dan Quinn in Dallas, and they found a very specific role for J-Ron Curse, and he's a very, very good football player. So that's a guy, JL Skinner, you draft him, you need to have a plan, because, you know, he's uber physical and he's got a great motor and he's got great height, great weight. He's that Tariq Woolen type, but you sort of question, like, oh, does he got stiff hips? Oh, what's his scheme? What's his role? So there are questions that you have to have about JL Skinner. I love JL Skinner, the player. I question whether Leslie Frazier would know what to do with him.
No,
that's my biggest concern.
And that's why we'll never draft him, but he'll still be on my favorites list.
There's so many, like Ivan Pace Jr. of Cincinnati is my favorite, one of my favorite players in this draft class. Like, I think he's just a pass rushing savant. Like, the guy, like, I just love his motor. We're going to talk about him in a little bit. Like, I love Ivan Pace Jr. out of Cincinnati. I know a couple of other people on social media do too. If the Buffalo Bills drafted Ivan Pace, Leslie Frazier wouldn't know what the F to do with him, and his skills would just be wasted. So I almost like sometimes I kind of root for these guys, despite the fact that I like them, to go to other teams, just because I know our coaching staff will freaking waste them. And Leslie Frazier wouldn't know what to do with a JL Skinner. He wouldn't know what to do with like an Ivan Pace. And I hate to sound mean. And like I said, I don't mean to sound too pessimistic this offseason, but if the Buffalo Bills had gone out and they had made a change at defensive coordinator and brought in somebody with a slightly different vision to challenge Sean McDermott and his way of thinking on defense a little bit, I'd probably be a little bit more in on a guy like JL Skinner. But
I mean, I'm in on him, but I know we won't.
No, I know. And Randy says, don't overthink it. And I know. But that's why my guy is Jamie Robinson and Christopher Smith. Like, Jamie Robinson from Florida State, high motor, position versatile, split safety, nickel, super productive tackler. I know that, like, his ball production is something that people question. He doesn't have a lot of interceptions, but this is a guy who's just always around the play. A guy like Jamie Robinson, I think, could be a plug and play. I'm not saying he's Jordan Poyer, but I think he's a guy who could fill his position right away and be serviceable at that strong safety spot, play the box, play back deep, do all the different things, play the run. And then he could slowly evolve as a player and get better and better and better. And then obviously Christopher Smith from Georgia, longtime player in that Georgia secondary, high football IQ. He's another guy you can move around, and he has the ball skill and he has those ball production. He's picked off a lot of passes. He struggles a little bit tackling, which means it's probably right up our defensive coordinator's alley. And he's got a little bit of a slim frame, but I'm a huge fan of Christopher Smith and Jamie Robinson, Jamie Robinson both. But those are my two guys, along with Kayvon Merriweather from Iowa. And that's just because I know he's got Eric's stamp of approval, and Eric really likes what Merriweather has to offer there. But there are some names. There are some names at safety this year.
I've liked looking into the safety class. Jamie Robinson.
We haven't even talked about Antonio Johnson either yet from
Texas
A&M either.
I know, but Robinson to me would be like the day one, if you move on from Jordan Poyer, he can fill in day one.
Yeah.
This is a guy that's improved every year. You mentioned, some of the lack of ball skills, but look, for like put whatever grain of salt you want on like PFF college grading, but went from 400 to 165 to 64. So he's like improved every year based on their grading scale. He's played a ton of snaps. He's played in a ton of positions. He's a sure tackler, which obviously means we won't draft him. And he's excelled in zone coverage, right? And he seems to be a perfect fit as far as a Jordan Poyer replacement should we move on from him. But there are a lot of safeties in this draft. There's a plenty of guys where if I started looking at some of the scouting reports and they cited lack of enthusiasm or lack of tackling, like I'm very hesitant for some of these guys. But there's so many guys that it just, to me, like seems like there's going to be somebody. Like they're even late round guys like Gavarius Owens, right, who is like at the Shrine Bowl, who has had an interesting path. He's an older guy, but like intriguing prospect as a later round guy. And like, so I love the safety class. I've had a fun time so far looking into them.
Yeah. Another interesting guy too is Ronnie Hickman. And
let me just, before you start, I want to just read word for word my note on Hickman.
Yeah.
Because I do have a note on him. I wrote the first sentence I wrote, one of my favorite early studies of this year's class. Hickman rocketed up PFF grading from 2021 to 2022. Sure tackler, type of emotion that he plays with is something the Bills could use on this defense. That was the first notes I had on Hickman.
Yeah, I mean, so a lot of the scouting reports I've read on Ronnie Hickman too is like he's a good processor. He's like really good in run fits, which is something that the Buffalo Bills are going to like. Like he's really good. He's really comfortable at the line of scrimmage, but that's where Ohio State used him a lot. And that's not to say he's not capable of dropping back into center field, but he wasn't asked to do it a lot at Ohio State. So you're doing a lot of projecting with Ronnie Hickman that maybe you aren't with some of these other guys. And the Buffalo Bills like their safeties to be split safeties. They like the guys to be comfortable at the line of scrimmage and comfortable center fielding. So the Buffalo Bills are going to have to do a lot of research on Ronnie Hickman, and they're going to have to isolate the film on how he center fields, and they're going to have to work him out and go to his pro day, and they're going to have to feel really comfortable. I think they add a veteran safety. I think they go out and they add like a Kareem Jackson type or whatever it is. And I think whoever they drafted safety as a backup this year, so they have time to develop this person. But at the end of the day, a guy like Ronnie Hickman is a little bit of projection because he's so isolated at the line of scrimmage for a team like Ohio State. But he's definitely an intriguing name and somebody that's on my list. I have right now. Again, and my list is a little fluid. Things change and things move a little bit around here, around there. I have him as a 4th round pick. So it'll be really interesting to see where he ends up. It's a little different this year too. I'm a little more loose with my grading scale because the Buffalo Bills don't have a 6th or a 7th round pick, or actually they might have a 6th round pick now.
They have a 6, no 7.
They have a 6 now because of the way the Nyheim Hines deal. It was a 5th rounder going to the Colts, so we get our 6th rounder back. So I'm a little bit like, because again, like some of those picks, I hate to use the word throwing a dart because I hate that term. We threw a dart, Luke Tanuna. It was a waste of a dart. But
total waste.
There are some guys where I'm like, I really like him. I'm really intrigued by him, but he's not going to reach undrafted free agency. I would use a 5th round pick on him when maybe he's a 6th or 7th rounder. So I've been a little looser, and I'm still tying some things off on my tightening some things up on my spreadsheet, but it should be interesting. How about the linebacker class? And I'll tell you what, between free agency and the draft, I'm all in on the Tremaine Edmonds re-sign train, right? Like, are you in the same category as me where it's just, to me, I just want Tremaine Edmonds back.
I want Tremaine Edmonds back. I don't want to necessarily have to overthink linebacker because look, at the end of the day, look how many positions we've started talking about already as kind of like really needs for the Bills. And it's like, do you really want to create one more need going into the draft when you only have the 6 picks and we know there aren't going to be a ton of like marquee signings in free agency. A lot of the signings in free agency are going to be, camp bodies, filler type guys, maybe guys that can kind of battle for, key backup positions and maybe a starter here or there. But if you have a chance to lock down Tremaine Edmonds and go into free agency and the draft without a question at your 2 linebacker spots, then I think that's what you do if you're the Bills, especially given his age. Like, it seems like a no-brainer to me.
Yeah, we got a question on Trey Dean from Alshar as
Good
well.
Shrine Bowl.
He had a good Shrine Bowl too. He's a guy who transitioned from corner to safety, and the Buffalo Bills have done their looking at that Florida secondary because they drafted Kyrie Elam. So Trey Dean is another guy. To me, he's a day 3 guy. So if we go out in free agency and we sign a guy like a Kareem Jackson, that's just the name that I'm going to plug in until we actually sign somebody. We go out and we add a veteran. He's a guy you could add on day 3 who you could hope to develop to be a starter in like 2024. So I don't think he's the kind of guy who's going to jump into the day 2 conversation like some of the other Shrine Bowl players and things like that. But he's certainly a player of note. And another safety I had that had a good Shrine Bowl was AJ Finley from Ole Miss. He was all over the place in the Shrine Bowl practices. And he's a bigger guy, sort of in that J-Ron Curse mold. So who knows if Leslie Frazier would know what to do with him. But linebackers at the Senior Bowl, Cam Jones from Indiana. I know a lot of our Cover 1 guys are big fans. Deion Headley from Washington State. Aubrey Miller Jr. from Jackson State. I don't think he gets enough love. But again, these are all to me like, I only want the Bills to carry 5 linebackers this year. I want them to bring back Edmonds. I want Milano. I want Bernard. I want Balon Spector. And then there's number 5. So like if we're adding a linebacker in the draft, first of all, let's hope Tremaine Edmonds is back. And if he's not, then I'll have to do a lot more research on the linebacker position. But if he's not back, or if he is back, I wouldn't mind a 5th or a 6th round guy just to sort of solidify that linebacking group to compete with veterans. It's sort of a Balon Spector type, throwing a dart at a linebacker with some tools. But again, I'd also prefer that linebacker to be a UDFA. And there's some Shrine Bowl guys. Muhammad Diabiati from Utah, Kyle Soleil from Arizona State, Isaiah Moore and Drake Thomas from NC State. Your guys, like Drake Thomas is a dog. Like I love Drake Thomas. I really hope that a guy like Drake Thomas could be available to the Bills either late or in undrafted free agency. I think he's a guy who could really sort of round out the Buffalo Bills linebacking room. But again, we're talking about 5th linebackers here until Tremaine Edmonds is gone, and then we'll have to reframe the conversation.
Yeah, and I mean, like we said, you don't want these holes going into the draft. Like again, like we were having this conversation last year, like because we weren't sure what was going to happen to Tremaine Edmonds beyond 2022. Like we were looking at guys like Nakobe Dean and others last year, and hoping we're not doing that. Like there's just too many other needs. Isaiah Moore from NC State, obviously, Patriots coaching staff had some good things to say about him. PFF has him rated as their 27th best linebacker in 2022. Is a big jump up in their rankings from 2021 to 2022, and would be kind of a natural Edmonds replacement based on his size. Mo Diabiati, you mentioned, he's inside their top 125 overall prospects on TDN. He sounds like he's like a rangy and athletic type. The scouting report really kind of reminds you of Edmonds as far as like his initial scouting reports, some inconsistencies in pass coverage, but rangy and athletic. And so if you're looking for the tools, that's something to look at. And again, that's what you're looking at as maybe like a backup option, maybe. But again, I'm with you on the philosophical front. I don't want to carry more than 5 linebackers. God forbid we carry 6 or 7 again. But please make better use of the 53 man that you have and only carry 5 linebackers, please.
All right, we're going to sort of rush through some of these last positions here. I know some people want to talk about edge rushers. So we're going to talk about edge rusher in a second, but interior defensive line intrigues me a little bit because Ed Oliver is likely going to be back. He's a 3 tech. Tim Settle, he could be a 1 tech or a 3 tech. I'd rather him just be a 3 tech. And then you have Daquan Jones. And then there's a question mark after that. Is Jordan Phillips back? Jordan Phillips, Tim Settle, kind of the same guy, even though Jordan Phillips is probably better. And I think any Bills fan, if they could choose between the two, would choose Jordan Phillips, but Tim Settle is the one under contract. You have guys like Brandon Bryant. You have guys like Kendall Vickers. You have guys like Ili Yunku. So you have some dudes, and I know no one wants to hear this, but there is a player that blew up the Senior Bowl who I've had my eye on for 2 years now, in Keanu Benton from Wisconsin. Our guy Brett Coleman sort of like put a picture of him up next to a picture of Christian Wilkins, sort of made that comparison a little bit. And then Eric Turner chimed in and said he reminds him a lot of Daquan Jones. Imagine, so we saw how effective Daquan Jones was this year and how much he helped a guy like Ed Oliver. Imagine if we had 2 Daquan Joneses. like what that could do. So maybe this is drafting a guy to help Leslie Frazier out a little bit, right? And to help Leslie Frazier do what he does. If Keanu Benton is sitting there on the board in the second round, Randy says, here we go. I don't know if that's sarcastic or not, but I think if a guy like Keanu Benton is on the board in the second round, maybe you consider it because of just how effective Daquan Jones was. And imagine if we had two of them.
It's a fun conversation every year talking about interior defensive line. I'll never forget a couple years ago when we were like pounding the table for a one tech, whether it was, Kyrus Tonga or Tadaro Slayton. Like I would just remember those conversations, and then of course the Lee McNeil like was a favorite of our, and it's just like, I'm not like, look, at this stage, we've invested so much early draft capital in the defensive line that like I'm only third round. Like I don't want to. I don't,
man. I'm pulling that trigger.
Yeah,
I love Keanu Benton.
That becomes a value proposition, but like I really don't want to have to talk about interior defensive line until day 3, if at all possible. But you're right. Like there are question marks beyond 2022. This is becoming a trend now for this team. There are question marks. I should say 2023 now. There are question marks beyond 2023.
And there are some 3 techs that were interesting, like Carl Brooks from Bowling Green had a big Senior Bowl. I really don't have an interest in a 3 tech. We have Ed Oliver, we have we have Tim Settle. Like if I'm looking for a guy, it's more of a nosy type, Daquan Jones type. Nesta Silvera from Arizona State. He got some love at the Senior Bowl. You look at the Shrine Bowl, Jerron Cage, Kobe Turner, PJ Mustapher. A guy I really liked was Broderick Martin out of Western Kentucky. You also have Keandre Coburn from Texas. There are some like day 3 defensive tackles that are interesting that could add some competition to possibly fill the Jordan Phillips role or to fill that 4th defensive tackle spot. I don't want to say the Jordan Phillips role because I don't think they'll be as good, and I don't think they'll be a 3 tech. I think they'd be more of a nose tech, a nose tackle. I know Randy really likes Dante Sills, but this is another guy who's like 285 pounds. Do you really want a second Ed Oliver? Like that's the question that you want to ask yourself. I lean more towards the Broderick Martins and the Keandre Coburns of the world who are more of a nose. And I know, Brett Coleman and those guys really like Jerron Cage from Ohio State and Kobe Turner from Wake Forest at the Shrine Bowl as well. So if I were to lean a defensive tackle, it would be a 1 tech and it would be on day 3 of the draft. But Keanu Benton is so tempting to me. So I'm just going to leave it at that. And we'll go to edge. Now, Randy's been saying this, and again, I don't know if he's saying this sarcastically or he's saying this seriously. And our guy Merck on Twitter has been saying this as well. Like he would not be shocked if the Buffalo Bills took a pass rusher with the 27th pick in the draft. And man, I think Bills Mafia would riot given the investment that we've made in the position and the investment that we've made on the defense. But who knows? Maybe we're singing a different tune after free agency, or maybe we draft this one and he actually clicks. But like there are some dudes in this draft, underclassmen, and then the Senior Bowl guys. It was again another name I'm gonna screw up on, but Adetomiwa Adebarie from Northwestern, Derek Hall from Auburn, Isaiah Folksy from Notre Dame, my guy Ivan Pace Jr. from Cincinnati, and Will McDonald, a versatile defensive lineman from Iowa State. There were a number of edge rushers who sort of popped at the Senior Bowl. Did anyone stick out to you in particular? I know McDonald and Pace were the most for me. I know Derek Hall was mocked to the Buffalo Bills by Mel Kiper in a mock draft. So there are some names there to sort of chew on and consider at edge rusher. Not in the second round. It's got to be 27. It can't be the second round.
Well, I think McDonald probably was maybe improved his stock the most. Because look, he's got the length the Bills would covet, right? He's got the high energy that the Bills would covet. But not the best run defender, and he doesn't necessarily have the most moves as a pass rusher. So it sounds exactly like the kind of guy the Bills would like. But he did have a nice week, and his stock probably went up a little bit. But like the guys that I'm going to be looking for, and if the Bills do decide to go, with an edge player in this draft, like I don't know. Is there a guy like in the early stages that's like more of that speed rusher type? Like I haven't necessarily fallen in love with anybody yet. But that doesn't mean I won't, right? As I do some more research, like maybe maybe Hall is that guy. He could be.
I think that you should look into Ivan Pace Jr. from
Okay.
Cincinnati.
Let me put a note here.
Ivan Pace Jr. I mean, this is a guy who and Steve Rose makes a good comment here. He says past investment does not preclude future investment if it's the position they feel they can get right. They obviously highly value the position, and you're right, they do. And this is a guy where Randy said earlier, don't overthink it. And a lot of people are going to overthink Ivan Pace Jr. And I question whether Leslie Frazier would know even remotely what to do with him. But 6 foot, 240 pounds. So not a big dude out of Cincinnati. He sort of a traditional linebacker who mostly just rushes the passer. He had 10 sacks last season. I mean, this guy he's got a repertoire of blitzes. He is tough as nails. His play temperament, his short area quickness and burst, he embodies a lot of what you look for in a pass rusher, and he gives you those. I don't want to say he's Micah Parsons, because Micah Parsons has way
Who
more
was that Western Kentucky
physicality
guy I
than him.
loved last year?
D'Angelo Malone. I think this is a little bit different than D'Angelo Malone, because I think D'Angelo Malone was a lot of stuff off the edge, and I think Ivan Pace could be utilized in the A gap, in the B gap.
Ooh.
I think he can be used off the edge. He's just a designated blitzer. You don't ever want to put this guy back into pass coverage. But again, the size, the length, at 6 foot, at 240 pounds, do you put him back into coverage? Do you try to use him as a traditional linebacker? I don't know. Randy Hardman says Nick Bolton-esque. I don't know if I would ever use him as a linebacker. I think I would just blitz him on every down. I think he would be a designated blitzer.
Well,
that's the interesting thing about an Ivan Pace.
Let me paint this picture for Bills Mafia as to justification why an edge rusher might be in play at 27. Von Miller's probably not going to be back for the start of the season. If he is, that's great, but he might not be, right? Greg Rousseau, great length, really good at getting his hands up. Not necessarily the pass rusher, extraordinaire. And AJ Epinesa and Boogie Bastion have kind of, for the most part, fallen out of favor from Bills Mafia, although it's been a high investment, second round picks for both of them. Ultimately, again, the future at this position, and even in 2023, there are quite a bit of question marks at the edge going in, especially if Von Miller's not ready for the start of the year. So we saw how much it affected the Bills to not have that guy who could get home late in the season. So just playing devil's advocate here, there is a path where I could see the Bills going for an edge rusher early in this draft.
All right, we're completely skipping cornerbacks. So I'm not gonna lie to you, I didn't have time to get to corners. Matt Miller did a mock draft today where he took a cornerback in the second round. I almost took my computer and threw it out the window. So that's where I'm at with taking a cornerback any higher than the fourth or the fifth round, taking a depth corner. You have Kyrie Elam, play him. If you're taking a DB, it better be a freaking safety. So let's transition now back to offense. And I get absolutely lambasted every time I bring up this position on social media. So I'm gonna throw it out there, and I'm gonna say, listen, running back, we have to talk about it, right? I'm not out here pounding the table for Bijan Robinson in the first round. I'm not doing that. That's not who I am this year.
That's not who you are.
So I'm going to walk timidly into this conversation. I do think the Buffalo Bills should draft a running back or sign a UDFA running back, one of the two. Yeah. I think that there are a ton of running backs in this year's draft class. There's also a ton of running backs in this year's free agency class. I think the Buffalo Bills need to find a complement to James Cook, and Nyheim Hines is no more than a number 3 running back who can be used in a Isaiah McKenzie gadget role and in a special teams role. So I think the Buffalo Bills need to add a running back. I'm not saying they need to add it on day 1 or day 2, but I think they need to add a running back at some point, a young running back. And there are a number of guys at the Senior Bowl who popped off, who I think could fill that role. Some names from the Senior Bowl: Evan Hull from Northwestern, Rashawn Johnson from Texas, Chase Brown from Illinois, Tajay Spears from Tulane. He probably had one of the biggest weeks in Mobile. Probably not the type of running back the Buffalo Bills are looking for. Eric Gray from Oklahoma, Chris Rodriguez from Kentucky, and Kenny McIntosh from Georgia. Who stood out to you the most, or what running back stood out to you the most in Mobile?
I mean, I like Kenny McIntosh personally. I mean, Georgia running backs have had obviously a good run here recently in the NFL. The Bills have another one on their roster. It's 6'1", 210. He's got a little bit more size. And I'm with you. I think that, you start looking at some of these guys that maybe aren't going to fit the bill. Spears, you mentioned, like that's not the type of archetype I'd be looking at if I was the Bills, because again, that's going to be a little bit redundant from a size profile to a guy like James Cook. So if I'm the Bills, I'm looking for a guy that's maybe a little beefier. I'm looking for a guy that can run between the tackles with some good vision. I don't necessarily need to have a guy that's a home run threat at running back, which I think is a different conversation that we've had the past few years when we've been clamoring for that type of back. And now it looks like we have that with James Cook. I think now, depending on what happens with Devin Singletary, you need a guy that you can trust in short yardage. You need a guy that you can trust at the goal line. You need the guy that's not going to lose yards, that can fall forward for 3 yards. And so that's the archetype I'm going to be looking at as I start to dive into this running back class a little bit more. Obviously, those, home run threat guys, those good guys, those guys that can catch out of the back, like that's great. But like, my focus is now kind of shifted because I want someone who's going to be more of a complement to James Cook and not someone who's going to be an exact kind of no one's going to really be the exact replication, but like I want something that's more of a complement. And you're right. In the draft, whether it's UDFA or later, like that's fine with me. But again, becomes a question of like, what can you get in free agency at this position? You shouldn't have to spend a ton of money in free agency at this position. So again, with limited draft picks, it's tough for me to say, like, I definitely want to go in on a running back in the draft.
And I'm with you too. Like my crush right now is Evan Hull from Northwestern. Good pass catching back, good in pass pro, sort of just like a slasher type of runner. Someone who he's just really quick and accelerating. He was telling people down in Mobile he's going to run a 4.4 at the combine. If he does, I think a guy like Evan Hull could end up way up the board because he had a huge week in Mobile. Like he could be a 3rd or a 4th round pick. I don't know if I'm going to make that investment in an Evan Hull, but I really liked Evan Hull. Rayshawn Johnson was Bijan Robinson's change of pace back in Texas. Like he's a big athletic dude. He played a lot of special teams because he was Bijan's backup. So a guy like Rayshawn Johnson, again, he's probably going to move up draft boards as well. He broke his hand in Mobile, so he didn't really get a chance to show off too much. But I think if he gets a chance to work out in the combine or his pro day, I think a guy like Rayshawn Johnson is going to move up boards as well. But I'm not very high on Chase Brown. I just don't think, he offers you nothing in the passing game. He offers you nothing in pass protection. He's kind of a clunky runner. Obviously Tajay Spears could end up being like a 2nd round pick the way he had a day in Mobile. And I think Tajay Spears is going to be somebody that's going to be a feature of the coverage at the combine. He's going to be a feature of the coverage on draft day. I think he's going to go rather high. I wouldn't be shocked if he is the 2nd or the 3rd running back off the board. Eric Gray from Oklahoma, Chris Rodriguez from Kentucky. Those are 2 solid options. Obviously, Chris Rodriguez has some fumble issues. He's a bruiser. I think he's a 6th or a 7th round pick. Eric Gray will probably go sooner. I like the Shrine Bowl guys. Like Jordan Mims from Fresno State. I love that dude. Like I think he is a really good running back. I think he could be a complement to a James Cook. Mohamed Ibrahim from Minnesota is another guy I think could be a perfect complement to James Cook. These are guys who could be had in the 5th, 6th round. A guy could be a UDFA, ex-Valade from Arizona State, the Wyoming transfer. He could be this year's sort of Raheem Blackshear, a guy you pick up off the streets after the draft who could come in and could probably make the 53-man roster. And then obviously there's Tavion Thomas, who's going to get those LeGarrette Blount comps at 250 pounds. He was bruising at the Shrine Bowl. So the Shrine Bowl was loaded with running backs as well. Like I said, it's a deep class for running backs. There are a ton of names. I encourage all of you to go out there and search these guys up and to look at their strengths and their weaknesses. I can envision almost 10 of these guys perfectly complementing, James Cook and Nyheim Hines in the Buffalo Bills backfield. And that's not even to mention one of my favorite prospects in this draft and Kazmir Allen, who I think is an Isaiah McKenzie type of replacement from UCLA, who had a pretty big Shrine Bowl as well. But a lot of good running backs in this draft class.
I mean, you mentioned Ibrahim, right? And I think like the injury history, especially because it's a lower body injury history with him, is going to kind of scare some people off. He's an older prospect, but like if you think about how the Bills have approached the running back position in the past, like they've pretty much been kind of one and done on a lot of these running backs that they've had in. They haven't invested necessarily long term in a ton of guys. So for me, Ibrahim, like even though he's older, he's got a little bit of that injury history, could be a value for the Bills for what they need, right? great yards after contact, great at pushing the pile, great in short yardage, can play in really any type of scheme, like could be a nice compliment to James Cook. And he could be a guy that you just have for one contract and then
Yeah.
he's gone and you don't care that he's going to be 25 years old
Mhm.
by the time he hits his rookie season. So like that's the type of thing that like it might turn off other teams if they're looking for more of like a longer term option, but for the Bills, it shouldn't matter as much.
Yeah. Looking at the tight end position, Cameron Latu from Alabama, Luke Musgrave from Oregon State, Payne Durham from Purdue. They all made some money this week in Mobile. Payne Durham has been one of my favorites. Like I loved watching Aiden O'Connell, Payne Durham, and Charlie Jones this year at Purdue. Like those are some fun players. And we'll talk about Aiden O'Connell in a second when we get to quarterbacks. But Luke Musgrave is knocking on the door of being a first round pick. CBS Sports mocked him to the Bills in the first round today for some godforsaken reason. And that sort of goes to my point, like Latu, Musgrave, Durham. I know the Bills were sniffing around the likes of Evan Ingram and things last year and like, oh, a big slot, etc. Do the Bills consider a tight end? And there's obviously like Michael Mayer as well. And there is Darnell Washington. So there are tight ends and everything that you can consider for the Buffalo Bills. And you can say, well, they're essentially a slot. We could run more 12 personnel. I have no faith in Ken Dorsey to make a second tight end work. Like that's where I'm at right now. Like I'm just content with let's go add some wide receivers. Let's roll with 11 personnel. Quentin Morris, Dawson Knox, call it a day. Pick up a couple of guys off the street towards the end of the draft or, in free agency, put them on the practice squad. Like Randy says, you can skip tight ends. That's where my mind is at. Where's your mind at with the tight end? And did anyone stick out to you in Mobile? I know guys like Josh Wiley and Davis Allen, they're fun middle round picks that could Will Mallory, like they're fun middle round picks that the Buffalo Bills could consider.
Yeah, look, I think, Mallory's an interesting guy. Obviously, you already mentioned, Payne Durham, and he had the nice, couple, nice
I think he
pylon
worked his way into
catch.
day two. I think he worked his way into day two this week.
I mean, he looked good. He kind of like gave me a few, a little bit of Daniel Bellinger vibes there. But I kind of am with Randy here, right? With limited draft capital, we like utilization of Quentin Morris last year was very sporadic. And obviously there were stretches in the season last year where the utilization of Dawson Knox was even sporadic. So I don't really see the need, one, to invest that much in the tight end position, whether it's the draft or free agency. And two, I don't really necessarily have the confidence that it's going to matter that much adding a third tight end to this group with Quentin Morris and Dawson Knox when there's been questions about utilizing your top tight end in this offense at times during 2022. Now, I think Dorsey will get better at that, and we did see that later in the season, him using Knox more. But to me, this is a position that is way down the list for me as far as draft need, as far as free agency need. It might honestly be last on the list out of all the positions outside of quarterback.
Truckerview comes in and talks about Hunter Lepke, who's a guy that I like too. Yeah, like if the Bills are sitting there in round 5 or round 6 and, that's a guy they could consider to take the load off of James Cook for like 5-6 carries a game, but also be a blocker and also be a move piece. He's listed as a fullback, but he can possibly be used sort of like in that running back role as well. He's certainly more of a runner than Reggie Gilliam, who's more of a pass catcher out of his fullback role. Obviously they're both, blockers first, but all right, my jabroni of the week, and we're going to close it out here by talking about quarterbacks. My jabroni of the week is Jim Nagy and what he threw out there at the quarterback position this week in Mobile. Like Jim does such a great job, and I don't want to harp on it too much, but I mean, what the hell was he thinking? Like Jaron Hall laid an egg. Max Duggan is going to get drafted, and I don't know why. Tyson Bagent from Shepherd was a joke. Like people were just curious about what he looked like, and it turns out he was a hell of a lot of nothing. Clayton Thune was dinking and dunking all week, but he'll probably end up as like a 5th or a 6th round pick. Malik Cunningham, I have no idea why he was there. And then the only one worth a damn, Hendon Hooker, who was obviously tore his ACL and was just there interviewing. Kudos to him for being there. And a guy who I really liked, and I was hoping could maybe slip to this 5th or 6th round. I don't know if he'll slip to the 5th or 6th round because he looked good by default this week. That's Jake Haener from Fresno State. I've been a big Jake Haener guy for 2 years.
He's the best quarterback there.
he reminds you a little bit about Baker Mayfield, and obviously Baker Mayfield probably shouldn't have been drafted number 1 overall. So obviously a guy like Jake Haener, who's got an arm inside 25 yards, he can hit. He's such a good, anticipatory passer. A guy like Jake Haener from Fresno State is going to be a solid like quarterback in this league. Spot starting type of quarterback in this league. I really liked him. And then the Shrine Bowl outdid the Senior Bowl because Aiden O'Connell from Purdue didn't have the best game. But he threw the ball all over the yard at Purdue this year. He reminds me of like a JV Jared Goff. I think he's a good backup type of quarterback. And my guy this year, I'll be pounding the table for him in the 5th, 6th round. Dorian Thompson Robinson from UCLA, like
Yeah,
5-year starter at UCLA under Chip Kelly, blue chip prospect coming out. He could obviously run, so he's a scrambling type of quarterback, but he's also got an arm too. I think those are all the sort of intangibles you look for in a backup quarterback. And I think DTR, Dorian Thompson Robinson, could be Josh Allen's Tyler Huntley. Like Tyler Huntley has been a serviceable backup behind Lamar Jackson, and the Ravens invested nothing to get him. I think Dorian Thompson Robinson could be that for the Buffalo Bills.
I mean, I don't really have a jabroni of the week. I'll just say this. I was disappointed in both games as far as the games, right? Like both games were not good, but obviously like getting the reports coming up from practice and hearing about how these guys are performing in practice is ultimately going to be pretty important, right? And like we mentioned, like Senior Bowl, national team only threw the ball 15 times the whole game. Obviously, in the Shrine Bowl, it was a field goal fest. Defense kind of stole the show.
Jake
The
Moody show,
kicker,
baby.
kicker was the MVP of the game. So I guess my jabroni of the week is not necessarily anything to do with the players, but just the games themselves were just not good. But for draft people who are obsessed with the draft and like looking at the prospects, it didn't matter. So it was. It was just a little bit disappointing on the football side, I'll say.
A couple minutes before we head out of here, because we'll close this out at an hour and a half. Thoughts on the Pro Bowl and the Pro Bowl games?
I think that there's potential for it to be entertaining.
So
I think the first year, it's a little bit of a feeling out process, like what works, what doesn't work. The NHL went through that for years with like the skills competition they did with like, and so I do think there's potential. Like the NFL needs to make it kind of like, I don't want to say like NBA All-Star Weekend where they have like this dunk contest and the 3-point shootout, but like something like that would work, I think, for the NFL, where there's like essentially no risk of injury. You can kind of have like these fun games and like that type of thing, I think has potential to kind of replace like the traditional Pro Bowl game. And obviously we saw that kind of happen this year with the Pro Bowl games. It's on the way to doing that.
And I think Claude Puig comes in, he says, we need to get the QBs to show up. And that's huge, right? Like there was Trevor Lawrence and like Kirk Cousins and Derek Carr were like the most notable quarterbacks that were there. It was kind of a joke in that sense, but I will say that there, you said there is potential there. I think what the NFL needs to do is they need to lean. It's weird that they're doing this the week before the Super Bowl and that the two teams that are representing your league, the Chiefs and the Eagles, aren't a part of it. Like that, like they each had a ton of Pro Bowlers who just aren't there. And that always just like has rubbed me the wrong way. I think if the NFL was smart, they would lean into the college all-star game. It doesn't even have to be the Senior Bowl. Pick a location, Dallas, Las Vegas, pick a location and have a NFL sanctioned college football all-star game. And it doesn't just have to be seniors. Like you can invite juniors and underclassmen as well, and turn that into a combine of sorts as well. Like you have so much success with the combine, go and try to recreate that success with the college football all-star game, where you show the practices all week and you introduce the world to the prospects all week and you do all that stuff. And then you have your Senior Bowl or your college football all-star game on that sort of Sunday to sort of fill the void of the Pro Bowl. Then you have your Super Bowl. Then you give that Super Bowl team a week to celebrate. And then 2 weeks after the Super Bowl, you do your NFL honors, right? You have your NFL honors on like a Sunday, and the day before, all the players that are in town for NFL honors, they can do the skills challenge and the flag football game on Saturday, and you have your NFL honors on Sunday, because it's just also super weird that the NFL honors is before the Super Bowl. Like the NFL honors should be ending with, the Super Bowl team hoisting the Lombardi trophy. Like it's just super weird. that the Super Bowl teams, Super Bowl players don't participate in that. It's not normal. And it kind of like kills the vibe of it. So to me, that's the route I would go if I was the National Football League. That's my 2 cents.
Well, and also you have like about a month period there between when the
Mhm.
Super Bowl ends and when free agency starts. So you do have some flexibility of the NFL with some dates there in between the Super Bowl and free agency to have a weekend like that.
Mhm.
Um, the alternative, one alternative could be like you almost combine the college, that college all-star game. And for the guys that do make the Pro Bowl, if they're not representative, like
Mhm.
the teams in the Super Bowl, you at least get a mix of some of maybe the pro guys in there. And there's maybe a little bit of a friendly kind of competition thing
Yeah.
between some of the top college prospects and some of the Pro Bowl guys would be
Mhm.
interesting. But um, it's just going to depend on what people are willing to watch at the end of the day. Right. And
Yeah.
so,
And Rel Wilson Sr. comes in and says both the NFL and the NHL turning their players into clowns is ridiculous. Ditch it. I don't disagree. I think the NFL did fine, but the NHL, man, I don't know if you saw the Boston Bruin players trying to recreate the Happy Gilmore
I
scene.
did. I did see
Ooh,
that.
so
It was
cringe.
bad. It
It
was
was
bad.
fun. It was fun to watch just because like F the Bruins, but like that was cringe. That was super,
Yeah.
super cringe. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we will be back next Monday and we're going to take a little break from the draft stuff to concentrate on free agency. So over the next 2 weeks, we'll be breaking down, all of the available free agents for offense and all of the available free agents for defense. We'll come with our list. So come prepared with your list as well. Guys that are, reaching for the stars type of guys, bargain bin guys, scour the free agent or the free agent wires and come back and join us for this conversation the next couple of weeks as we talk offensive and defensive free agency before we get right back at it for the NFL Combine. It's the off season. It is the best season, because
We're in our lane right
we're in
now.
our lane right now. There we go. All right. So, ladies and gentlemen, always appreciate you. You can catch us on demand at any time. If you missed any portion of the show, you can rewind it back. If you want to listen to us on your car, at the gym, etc., you can find us on all major podcasting platforms at Air Raid Buffalo. And until next time, ladies and gentlemen, go Bills.
Go Bills.